All right, hello, wine-drinking people. We are back. And I know you're starved for an Ask Ward or Accessorize with Cheech or something like that. Tony's Treats. I don't know what happened. We just kind of fell right off the radar scale. We'll try to get back to work, folks. But a lot to talk about and what I drank yesterday. So I'm going to get right to that. We've got our first seminar on Saturday morning from the Great Wine Seminar. The great Olivier Bernard was in to moderate this, along with, of course, English coach. All right, well, Clive was still sober at this point in the morning, but I remember the first seminar that Olivier was at 10 years ago, where I was just introduced to the wines of Domaine de Chevalier, one of the great growths of Pessac-Léognan, and these wines tend to be a little more elegant, and as Olivier stated, I do not make wine to appeal to a certain American writer. I don't know who he could have been talking about. Not me. I'm a merchant. No, but he makes wines that are, really speak volumes about the place where they're from. And a very passionate man. He took over this chateau from a very well-known Bordeaux family, someone also very passionate. And when he moved in, it wasn't apparent that, these guys were going to get along, but they had a father-son type relationship. Really great story, the succession here that's happened at Domaine de Chevalier. And still one of the world's greatest white wines. This was the big surprise for me 10 years ago. I was familiar with red Bordeaux, but I hadn't had a lot of great white Bordeauxs and not a lot of great old white Bordeauxs. So this property holds a special place for me and in my wine drinking heart. And I love the wines even from vintages like 2003, which Mr. Coates is openly criticizing because of its California nature, forward fruit, and all kind of good stuff like that. But I would have to say everything these guys make, even in off vintages like 81. I was like, whoa, who's cheaping out here, bringing the 81? I know they didn't have a great vintage in 82, but the 81 was very nice, as was everything else. The 2009, this has been touted as by every major member of the wine press as the greatest vintage of all time for reds. Well, this wine did have incredible ripeness, and it also had the ripeness, but it had acidity, and a lot of times ripe vintages will be at the expense of acidity. 2009 has it all, and it's all and a box of chocolates. This 2009, most excellent juice, just very, very young. All right, 2008. I really like this wine. Oliver was quick to point out that it'll benefit from another 30 years in your cellar. So 2008 for him, a very classic style wine. Smoky, toasty, oak, red currants-like fruit, a little lead pencil, coffee, lovely freshness and firm tannin still. 2007, a little light, okay? 2007 was a lighter vintage, but, a wine, this is when a great property like this really shines in a vintage like 2007. Red currants, slight metallic note to the nose, some green peppercorns, light coffee nuance there. Really nice and pleasant finish. And then 2006, also a little light and herbal, not a great vintage for Bordeaux, but a very good one. And this wine also very good, some smooth and silky tannins. Drinking nicely now, but should hold for another 25 years if the 61 is any indication, maybe even more than that. Well, 61's a little better vintage. All right, 2005, a blockbuster, as we expect from this vintage in Bordeaux, and still very young. Should evolve really nicely over the years. Most excellent stuff. 2004, this is the vintage I went after tasting wines with the 2006 Grand Cru's, and 2004, placed between 05 and 03, to me, just was not half of the wines, and it's half the price. And 2004, a really classic style vintage too, a really good value if you can find 2004 Chevalier out there in the market. I can tell you right now, the next wine, the 2003, is the only one that's available. That's right, folks. It's around $75 a bottle on this offer, and we have a couple vintages of white in the store, but just one lowly vintage of red. Can you believe that? In all of South Florida could we find. And Clive was openly criticizing 2003 because of its forward nature, but we love the seductive forward nature of 2003. Lovely roasted coffee, fine herbs, plump red currants, ripe plum. Really nice wine. Drinking at or near its peak right now, but this wine should hold for another 10, 15 years easily. All right, well, 2002, some fresh dirt here, bell pepper. This wasn't a great vintage. A little bit of balsamic note on the nose too, but nice freshness. Just a nice little quaffer, and at the right price, not a bad buy. All right, 2001, another classic vintage in Bordeaux, and I love the 2001, some caramel and toffee notes, toasty oak, and gravelly minerality showing through, which is Pessac, and I've always liked these wines for their freshness and their elegance. 2000, this wine's still very young, a big, full array of fresh earth, gravelly minerality, floral nuance, plums and currants, You know, a bit closed on the palate right now, but maybe we should open this wine a couple hours earlier, you know, or the next day, the day before. But really nice wine nonetheless. 91, you know, this is not a great vintage in Bordeaux, but this is where, you know, again, great producers shine. This was out of Magnum. You know, Olivier's got a thing with numbers, you know. It's 2011, so he brought the 91, the 81, and the 61. They all ended ones. So someone, you know, a wise crack, you know, from the back of the crowd, somebody said, hey, what about the 89? He said, oh, you have to come back in 2019 to try the 89. So, but anyways, everything was great. The 81 was showing beautifully, and the 61, you know, a really nice bottle of wine, maybe somewhat past its peak right now, but excellent. And then the 2008, well, then the white wines, the 2008 whites. We did a little vertical of that going back to 2008, 7, and 6. And my favorite in that was the 2007, a great vintage for whites. You know, these wines all had this lovely pineapple, Jolly Rancher kind of fruit, little pink grapefruit, also citrus, a melon, fig. And, you know, 2007, you know, this has got the legs to go the distance to me, this vintage, maybe 30 years. And, hey, the 2001, that was the wine I bought after the first seminar 10 years ago. I thought that wine was going to be fabulous 20, 30 years down the road, like the 81 was, the old dog we had. 2001 was in a weird phase. A lot of people thought it was going through, like, premature oxidization, but I don't know. I think it could just be going through a difficult stage in its youth, you know, like Olivier says, with just like humans, when they go through their adolescence, they can be bad, you know, so let's just hope the 2001 was just behaving badly, because I sold a bunch of that stuff. I know a few people mentioned to me they had cases of that. They were a little worried about it. Well, don't give it up just yet, because the 81 was stunning, absolutely spectacular. And, you know, Clive was quick to point out that the quality of the vintages for whites doesn't always coincide with the quality of the vintages for reds, because the 81 red, not near as stunning as this wine was. This wine had a bouquet of sausage, smoke, cocoa, just really exotic. You know, the minerality starting to really show through in the wine, and a just incredibly long finish, lovely freshness, and still some fruit. And that's what I had to drink at the Domaine de Chevalier seminar, at the Great Wine Seminar. Coming up next, we've got the stuff we had to drink in the store yesterday.